everybody. This is Cece Doucette with TechSafe, brought to you by WCCA TV in Worcester, Massachusetts. We're so grateful for this opportunity to share information with you about wireless technology risks and safer ways to use today's technology. Today we have with us a woman named Sue Fama from Western Massachusetts, and she unfortunately has been displaced out of her home because she could no longer stay where these man-made electrical fields are. So, Sue, welcome, and thank you so much for finding the time to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Alrighty. So can you tell me how you first learned that there were biological effects to man-made energies?
I had heard about it for years, but I never really looked into it too intensively. But about 6 years ago, I got a new apartment and I was really excited about it. And I had already been chronically ill with a couple. Living there for about a year, I started getting really, really sick. And I thought at first that it was just kind of having a rough period of time. But things got really scary after a while. I really couldn't ignore it anymore. I started having a lot of symptoms that I hadn't really experienced that intensely before. My blood pressure, my blood sugar, and my body temperature were all dropping randomly to kind of scary levels. And I kept kind of just trying to take care of myself and rest, and it was just getting worse and worse. And so one night it got bad enough that I was turning blue because I couldn't get my body temperature up above 94 degrees. I was having trouble breathing. I couldn't walk. I was extremely weak and dizzy, and I couldn't get my vitals back to normal. And so I ended up calling 911, and they unfortunately did not really understand what was going on, and so they didn't really believe me, and I don't feel like I was treated very well. I got through the night, I survived, and then, I had some follow-up doctor's visits after that to try to get to the bottom of what was going on, and again, I really wasn't treated well, and I wasn't believed, and so they said I was fine, and I knew that I wasn't fine because every time I was at home, I was getting really, really scary sick. And so I had to figure it out myself is kind of the conclusion that I came to. Mm-hmm. So I started doing research and looking online to try to, figure out what was going on with me. And there's some really good forums, and I started talking to these forums of people with hypersensitivities, and realized this is exactly what I'm dealing with. Once I realized, yes, this is what's going on, what can I do about it now? And so that's when I started talking to people. I got myself a meter, and then I started, figuring out where the sources were coming from that were bothering me. And I started with the Wi-Fi. And it was, obviously my router in my house. And then it was also coming from up above me because I was in a basement apartment. So I was getting it from up above me. So that's how I learned about it, which was the hard way to learn about it. But
yeah, and sadly, that's not unique. A lot of people find that they're suffering all these symptoms, and they'll go to their doctors, and the doctors will run the tests they know to run and come up empty. And then they wind up paying a lot of money out of pocket to go see specialists who run the tests they know to run and then come up empty. So we hear this time and again. And your situation reminds me a bit about like Deb Hodgson up in New Hampshire. She is the citizen who is behind the incredible work that the New Hampshire legislature has done to investigate the biological effects of man-made frequencies on not only us, but the environment too. And Deb was going to go off of Coumadin, and she had heard that wireless technology could affect the viscosity of the blood. So she told her family that she was going to go get the house, sanitized from wireless radiation transmissions. And as you may have experienced, people look at you like you're crazy when you say there's something wrong with wireless. But Deb, she was literally fighting for her health here. So she got all the wireless out of the house. And what made her family finally come around is that her adult children had given her a plant that just sat in the kitchen doing a whole lot of nothing for about a year. And as soon as she got the wireless out, that plant shot up 15 inches in just 2 months. So that was like a high school science experiment. We can find some of those online too, where they expose certain seeds to EMFs and then the control group doesn't, and you see the poor little control group thriving, and the ones that are being radiated are, getting very damaged. So I'm so sorry that has been your experience. I also know of a woman in Quincy, Massachusetts, who lives in the flight path to Logan Airport, and she's electro-hypersensitive, and she can feel the planes coming long before most people could hear them coming. So she bolts down to her basement where they've created a Faraday cage where she can't be hit with the radiation, but she is basically a shut-in in her home. And one night, she got really, really sick to the point where her husband called 911. And as you noted, if these first responders are not trained in these electromagnetic fields, which are also called microwave sickness, they don't know what to do. And in her case, instead of getting her the medical care that she desperately needed at that moment, they put her in the psych ward, which was filled with wireless radiation. So it just went from bad to worse. And she has fought it, though. She has gotten her medical record expunged so that it doesn't say that she's crazy in there. And she still lives basically cut off from society, which I understand, Sue, is kind of where you find yourself in many situations today. Can you share with us how this discovery that these man-made frequencies were injuring you, how did that change your life?
Well, it limited it even more than it already was. It's very difficult to go anywhere, really shopping. Anywhere you go has Wi-Fi now, and also just cell towers, and also just people with their phones in their pockets. So it's really difficult to go anywhere or to be around anybody, even in somebody's home, even in a good friend's home. They most likely have wireless, and it's difficult to get people to understand that you're sensitive to that. And it's hard. It's hard, especially when you really rely on them at this point. And it's hard to, when you rely on something, you don't have another means of doing it. A lot of people need these things for work, or they feel they need it for safety. And so, when I tell somebody, do you mind just keeping that in your car or turning it off for the time that we're together? It's just easier at this point to really isolate myself, which is kind of sad, but that's really the reality of it. Mm-hmm. So it's very limiting, very, very limiting.
I am so sorry. A colleague up in Canada mentioned recently that just like with the pandemic, some of the grocery stores were opening up and reserving the first hour of the day for perhaps senior citizens who are a vulnerable population to COVID-19. A colleague up in Canada just let us know that now some of the stores are starting to do that courtesy for people with sensitivities, and it could be people who are on the autism spectrum, and they can't be in these big stores that have the artificial lighting where there's a sensory overload happening. So that's a little bit encouraging that might create pathways of a white zone where they would shut everything off during a certain portion of the day so that you could go in and access what you need to access just to live your life, the grocery stores, the doctor's offices, hotels. I know I've heard of a few hotels scattered here and there where they have either a white zone with no radio frequency, or they have just said, we're only going to have one place in the hotel where there's going to be wireless access. All of our guest rooms will have no wireless in it. So we're hopeful that trend will continue. I know every time I travel, I have that conversation with the hotels, and I get to teach them about it. And like you said, you purchased a radio frequency detection meter. And one of the good bits of information is that we now have an EMF, or electromagnetic fields, medical conference available to the entire world. And it is now out on the web, out on the internet. And it was originally for 24.5 continuing medical education credits. But that expired in July, and now Elizabeth Kelly, who's the executive director of that conference, has taken the full conference in video and put it online. And there are 60-some videos associated with that conference, so you'll get to hear from world-leading scientists, doctors, building biologists, advocates on what this issue is. And this is the meter that was recommended to healthcare practitioners at the EMF Medical Conference. It's called the Safe and Sound Pro 2 Broadband Radio Frequency Radiation Detection Meter. So as difficult as this is, the conversation is becoming just that much easier to have now that we have this full medical training, not only for doctors and nurses, but for first responders and for all other forms of healthcare practitioners and the general public. So somebody like you, Sue, who was just having to figure this out on your own, you could go to this one website for the EMF Medical Conference 2021, and you can watch those videos. They range from, I think, 17 or 18 minutes to a half an hour to an hour. And if you go to the website for the conference, you could just print out the schedule and then just check off the ones that you're interested in and do them over any length of time, because Libby Kelly wants to keep these videos up because they're still highly relevant today. So we have a lot, but you're right, you can't tell these invisible exposures unless you measure. And I think for those listening along with us today, we see this as going up into the high range because there is radio frequency in this building. I have my cell phone here, but I keep it in airplane mode as a rule, and I only turn it on for emergencies. And by now, people know to get me through my landline at home, and you can forward a cell phone call to a landline, so you don't need to use mobile technology when you're not on the go. So as we've taught people along the way, it's not rocket science to fix with most of the exposures. On the back of your router, or the bottom of your router, you'll find Ethernet ports, and you just need to plug Ethernet cables in, and then there are little adapters you can get to go to your devices, because a lot of devices don't have the direct Ethernet connector anymore. So the solutions are all here, but we can only fix so much on our own. Were you impacted at all, Sue, by the utility smart meters?
I honestly don't know. The apartment that I was living in, the last year and a half of me living there, something changed incredibly in the electricity. And I don't know if it was a smart meter or if it was something else in the grid, but I started really experiencing a whole lot of dirty electricity coming through the walls that I was not able to remediate. And I don't know what the cause of that was.
Yeah, so we have something called the Building Biology Institute, and that is an organization that certifies professionals and highly trains them to go in and do an assessment of a indoor space. And when Sue talks about the dirty electricity, so there are several kinds of man-made energy or man-made radiation. When we talk about our cell phones, that's radio frequency radiation. But there's a couple other kinds that, if not done properly, can really be hazardous. So if you were to build a commercial building and do construction, you, by electrical code, would be required to have wires that are shielded. And what that means is that inside this plastic encasement, there's an aluminum wrapping around the wires that are inside here. And that aluminum keeps the electric and the magnetic field from pulsating out into our living spaces from inside the wall. It actually goes out into our living spaces about 6 or 8 feet. And ideally, when you have energy coming in, you have energy going out, and they are equal and they cancel each other. And that's about as technical as I can explain, because I'm not an engineer or an electrician. But if you have more energy in one of those directions than is canceling out or being grounded properly to discharge out into the ground, then you've got this dirty electricity and bad harmonics going on your wires. And that oftentimes is what can make people very sick, in addition to the electromagnetic fields of radio frequency radiation. So there's a gentleman named Jeremy Johnson, who's a Silicon Valley engineer, and his wife is a medical doctor. And they both lived out in Silicon Valley, and they all of a sudden started getting very, very sick, and nothing in her medical training could teach her or her husband what was going on. And when they dug into it, they discovered it was a bank of smart meters that had gone in on their condo complex. And the energies that were coming off of that made them so very sick. And Jeremy Johnson now has developed a consulting practice at emfanalysis.com. And you can go out to his website. He's got a lot of really good information and fact sheets. And he also has a TED Talk. So most of our engineers, our scientists, our physicists, our technologists have only been taught that you have to have heat from a radiating device to have harm. And now we know scientifically that that is not the bottom of the story there. Granted, heat is bad, but the Federal Communications Commission allows radiation limits way up here, and the science is now showing great biological harm hundreds of thousands of times below that. So the FCC has been sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of evidence of harm entered into the public record, and it's been 2 years. The DC Circuit Court of Appeals found that the FCC was arbitrary and capricious. They had not done their homework. They had not reviewed the public record, and they told them to go back and do it better. But it's been 2 years, and they didn't give them a deadline, so the FCC has done nothing. So that's why we do what we do, and we try and educate as many people in our communities as we can, because people simply have no idea that these man-made energies bring great harm. And in fact, today I was contacted by a woman in medical school, and they use a system inside the classroom that uses wireless technology to log in answers for a couple minutes during, however long the lesson is. They just need it for a couple minutes. So she tried to tell her professor, why do we have the wireless on the entire time we're in here when it's a neurotoxin, it's an immunosuppressant, it causes infertility and cancers, and she was trying to educate her professor. And when he went to go look for it, the first thing he found was an article that came out in the New York Times this past week where somebody said, do I need to worry about my cell phone? And then they start pushing the industry spin like, oh, it's inconclusive, there's no harm. And they brought in 3 supposed experts. And when you do the research on these experts, not one of them is well published in this field on the biological effects of radio frequency radiation. So what we're seeing is the big tobacco playbook all over again. And, it's very sad because we used to have 50 or so mainstream media outlets, and they got bought up, and they got bought up, and they got bought up, and now they're all owned by the same 4 to 6 corporations who profit from these environmental pollutants. So the New York Times, people should know, they have a 5G test lab at the New York Times with Verizon, so they've got huge conflicts of interest. They have industry on their board, and the information that they put out there simply is false. So it's disheartening because we want to believe that others have our best interest. But that's why we're so grateful that New Hampshire did a year-long investigation. They looked at the non-industry funded peer-reviewed scientific literature, and now the whole world has this commission report that documents the conflicts of interest with the wireless industry, the FCC, and the FDA, and then they make 15 recommendations to move away from wireless for primary connectivity. It is no longer advanced technology. We need to be bringing fiber optics to and through the premises and then simply hooking up our own equipment with Ethernet cables and adapters. So it's not rocket science to fix, but if we don't keep sharing the information, mainstream media is owned by industry, so they're not going to tell the truth. And so twice a month, with Massachusetts for Safe Technology, we collaborate with New Hampshire for Safe Technology, and we do 2 free public education webinars so that everybody has the opportunity to learn the facts. We will send you the recording so you can listen to it again, and we'll send you my slides, which are complete with links to the scientific literature, to the lawsuits that are happening, to public policy. And Sue, I know it doesn't help you very much today because you've been displaced from your apartment, but we do have 6 bills here in Massachusetts that will be reported on in February. We've got one relative to these utility smart meters so that, first of all, we shouldn't be putting a radiating device on our homes. That should get ousted. But until we get there, we should at least have the opportunity to opt out of anything that's transmitting on our house. So Senator Michael Moore, who I was fortunate to interview just a few weeks ago on this program with TechSafe, he has a no-fee opt-out bill with an emergency preamble so that as Eversource and National Grid are telling our Department of Public Utilities, hey, our fleets are aging out, we're going to come in the next 2 years and replace everybody's meters with smart meters. They need to stop doing that. Chattanooga, Tennessee has already hardwired to the premises with their utility meters. And then we need to be able to opt out in the interim today from anything that's already transmitting. And then we've got a bill to do what New Hampshire did, to form a commission. We've got a bill to protect kids from handheld devices. And then we have one to protect children in schools. And some of our audience members know that I worked with my schools here in Ashland, Massachusetts, and we became the first in the nation to post best practices for mobile devices that says, turn these devices off when we're not using them. Only turn the Wi-Fi on when you need it, because right now they are putting these wireless access points in every single classroom and just radiating the children and the staff and the teachers when we don't even need that. All the schools have to do is run Ethernet cables again. So we have a bill that would get the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to get on this because they have told me they are waiting for higher authorities to tell them what to do. And then there are 2 bills, Sue, that will be to your benefit directly. One is an act prohibiting injurious operations or offering services or products that discriminate against or injure protected classes. So that's Senate Bill 1044 from Senator Paul Mark. And that's the last of our bills that has not come up for public hearing soon. I just spoke to their offices, and in the coming month or 2, we should have a public hearing on that. So you'd be able to send in your statement and say, yes, I need to be able to access society, and we need to have our civil rights protected. And then the last one that would apply to you directly is House 2158. It's called an act recognizing electromagnetic sensitivity as a disease dangerous to the public health, requiring inclusion in MAVEN, which is our state's illness tracking database, and establishing the Massachusetts EMS registry and requiring biennial reporting as part of population health trends. So right now, Sue and everybody else who's getting sick from this radiation has nowhere to report it to. So we already have a database in Massachusetts, and this would allow us to include electromagnetic sensitivities, which have been recognized by the Americans with Disabilities Act for 2 decades now. So, Sue, we're trying really hard to try and get the accommodations you need, and more importantly, to stop the madness with wireless radiation. So what advice do you have for others who find themselves with symptoms that nobody else can figure out?
I would as counterintuitive as it seems, I would go online, and there's excellent forums, because the people that are experiencing it are the experts, because there's no other structure. I mean, there's the work that you and other organizations are doing, but it's still not completely accepted. And so the information isn't as easy to access all the time. But there's excellent forums online of people that are suffering it all over the world. And there's so many people that are suffering from it. And most of them are living these very limited lifestyles. But they have experiences. You can ask any question you want. These people know what it's like, and they can give you the advice that you need and a starting place, because it can be very overwhelming. But if you take it step by step, just one little change at a time, you can have a better quality of life, and you can help yourself physically heal, and learn habits that you can change that will make you, put you in a much healthier position. And it's really important to pay attention to the symptoms if you are having them, and to look out for children. If you have children, you really need to pay attention to how much wireless they're exposed to. And I would really, the first thing I would do, though, is, for anybody really, is limit your Wi-Fi exposure. And if you can't do that at work, do it at home, especially at nighttime. Nighttime, when you're sleeping, is the most important time for your body to heal. And if you have Wi-Fi barraging you, you're not healing, you're not rejuvenating, you're not letting your body go back to a healthy place. So either shut off your Wi-Fi, or definitely get your phone away from your head. I know some people sleep with it under their pillow. That is absolutely, please don't do that. Please don't do that. That's the worst. But at the very least, have a time when you're sleeping that you can be not exposed to it. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And if getting a landline is the only way to do it, then get a landline.
Yeah, and that's such great advice. We do our 2 free public education webinars twice a month. If you go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technology and go to our events page, you will be able to register for those, and we do a good Q&A at the end too, where people can ask questions. So, Sue, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so honored to have you and your experience to share with others, and we look forward to connecting again down the road. Thanks, everybody, and have a tech safe day.